Guten Tag. Today we're going to look at a grammar topic that is das Imperfekt, which is past tense. You used das Imperfekt for modal verbs and the verbs haben and sein when we did our Kindheit unit. Those were the forms that were things like ich war, ich hatte, ich konnte, ich musste, and so on. Today we're going to learn those forms for all verbs, and we're going to practice it the way that is used for writing fairy tales. The past tense that you learned in German too is called the perfect. In English, you'll sometimes hear to it referred as the conversational past tense. This newer structure that we've learned this year is called the imperfect, or sometimes called the formal past tense. We're going to look at how they're similar and how they're different. You can enter this information into the Venn diagram in your Google slideshow. Erstmals die Zeit. Beide Formen beziehen sich auf der Vergangenheit. Both forms refer to things that happened in the past. Zweitens, die Wortstellung. Beide Formen haben das konjugierte Verb an der zweiten Stelle. Just like you learned in German 1, the conjugated verb goes second. In the Perfekt, the form that you learned in German 2, there are zwei Verben, two verbs. The first one is haben or sein, which is conjugated. The other one is the Partizip, past participle of the verb, usually formed with a ge prefix and a t suffix, like gespielt, gemacht, gekauft, gearbeitet. For this one, for the Wortstellung word order, haben or sein will be conjugated and go second, and the past participle, the ge form, goes at the end. For Gebrauch, use, this is primarily used in speaking as well as informal writing, things like SMS, which is what Germans call text messages, or social media posts, for example, the Instagram post project that you did in German 2. In contrast, the Imperfekt hat nur ein Verb, only has one verb. Für die Wortstellung, das Hauptverb steht an der zweiten Stelle, again, conjugated verb goes second. Und für das Gebrauch, for the use, wir benutzen das für Schreiben und formelles Sprechen. You would use this for writing, such as with a fairy tale, or for formal speaking, such as, for example, a presentation. Wie formt man das Imperfekt? How do you make it? Mit schwachen oder normalen Verben benutzt du das Suffix te. There's a spot for you to take notes on this in your Google slide. Ähnlich wie das Suffix ed auf Englisch. Zum Beispiel mit machen sagst du stattdessen machte. So the regular form is machen. You put the suffix te on the verb stem to make it machte. Pause this video for a moment and fill in the past tense of the rest of these verbs in the chart on your Google slides. Then we'll check it together. So we said the form for machen is machte, for spielen is spielte, for sagen is sagte, for tanzen is tanzte, arbeiten is arbeitete, sounds weird, is actually correct, kaufen is kaufte, and hören is hörte. So those work similar to verbs that take an ed to make their past tense in English, such as played, or worked, or danced. With these forms, you use the same verb endings that you're used to for modal verbs. That is to say, the ich and RZS both get no ending, but the du, wir, ihr, and sie forms get the same endings that you're used to from conjugating regular verbs. Fill in those endings in your Google slides, then do an example in the next chart over, conjugating the verb machen in the imperfect. Pause the video now and we'll check it together when you're done. Looking at the past tense forms of the verb machte, that form machte we pulled from the chart above, put no ending on. For du, we have du machtest. RZS machte, notice how the ich and RZS forms are the same. Wir machten, ihr machtet, and sie machten. This is really easy. What about with unregelmäßige Verben, irregular verbs? Just like with the perfect or the conversational past tense, lots of the most common verbs are irregular in the imperfect. You already have this handout that you can see here, all of the irregular past tense verbs from our childhood unit. It's also attached in this Schoology folder if you can't find your copy. You always, always, always need to look up the forms of past tense verbs because most of the most common verbs are irregular in the past tense. If you can't find a verb, try looking for its root word rather than starting with its prefix. If you still can't find a verb, that may mean that it is regular and works the way that the verbs do that we just practiced, like machte. Use this handout to fill in the imperfect forms of these 7 verbs. Pause the video now and we'll check together when you're done. So the imperfect form of essen is aß, of schwimmen is schwamm, of singen is sang, of sinken is sank, of stinken is stank, of finden is fand, and of stehen is stand. I want to point something out to you. The reason that I chose these verbs is because all of the present tense forms, essen, schwimmen, singen, sinken, stinken, finden, and stehen, are cognates for English: to eat, to swim, to sing, to sink, to stink, to find, and to stand. Notice that just like the present tense forms are cognates for our English words, their past tense forms are cognates for the same irregular past tenses in English. Instead of I ate, ich aß. Instead of I swam, ich schwamm. Instead of I sang, ich sang. Instead of I sank, ich sank. Instead of I stank, ich stank. Instead of I found, ich fand. And instead of I stood, ich stand. They're not always spelled the same in German and in English, but you'll notice that the vowel change is very similar between the two languages. Now let's look at how to do these imperfect verbs in sentences. Remember, this should be easy. The conjugated verb just goes second. I've given you some sentences simply telling the story of Hänsel and Gretel, and I've underlined all of the verbs. You're going to rewrite the sentences in the chart on your Google slideshow, including the imperfect forms of those underlined verbs. We can do the first one together as an example. Hänsel und Gretel gehen in den Wald should turn into Hänsel und Gretel gingen in den Wald. You should refer to your handout to get those past tense forms, and remember that not only did I have to find the past tense form of gehen, which is ging, but I had to add an en ending because Hänsel und Gretel is a plural subject, plural sie meaning they. Pause the video now and go rewrite the rest of these sentences. We'll check them together when you're done. Number 2 was Sie finden ein Haus aus Lebkuchen. To rewrite in the past tense, it would be Sie fanden ein Haus aus Lebkuchen. Again, remember to get that conjugation ending. Sie essen das Haus should be Sie aßen das Haus. They ate the house. Die Hexe fängt sie should turn into Die Hexe fing sie. She caught them. Die Hexe will Hänsel und Gretel essen. This should be a throwback to what we did in our Kindheit unit, where you wrote Die Hexe wollte Hänsel und Gretel essen. The reason that essen stays the way it was is because wollte is a modal verb. Even past tense modal verbs still go with unconjugated action verbs in the past tense. Hänsel täuscht die Hexe. Hänsel tricks the witch. This one wasn't on your verb list because it is regular in the past tense. Hänsel täuschte die Hexe. Schiebt sie in den Ofen und entkommt aus dem Haus mit seiner Schwester should be schob sie in den Ofen und entkam aus dem Haus mit seiner Schwester. Schieben changed to schob. Entkommen changed to entkam. If you couldn't find entkommen, you needed to look for the verb kommen. The past tense form is kam, and then keep that prefix with it. So that's how you make the past tense. I hope that you found this pretty easy. See you in class. Tschüss.